Why is it that even though you've got 100% employee turnover, Coca-Cola was found in the 1800s, late 1800s, but it still exists, and there's certain things about the ingredients, the recipe, and the know-how that remain the same. And that is about organizational learning. And clearly, it's no longer the same collection of people, but there's certain elements that haven't been discarded. The important things, there is evolution around the practices, around the norms of behavior, the strategies for action, and the assumptions for functionality that are the focus that are kept to move on. Now, the question is, how does the individual theory in use influence the organizational theory of action? I just want to tell you a small story of SAPI. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed engineer got into SAPI. SAPI is, in South Africa, it's our paper pulp manufacturing company. And this person believed that everybody who was there before them knew nothing because she was a qualified engineer. On the night shift, the guys that were there realized that around about 3 o'clock in the morning, the paper on the roll started tearing, and they didn't know why. And the night shift guys couldn't explain, and the day shift guys came in. And one of the old guys said to them, there's a problem in that you don't know what the know-how is and the learning of the organization. If you look in the corner there, you look in, there is a long pool cleaner with the cloth at the top. And because there is humidity at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the only thing you must do is clean the beam, because the water drips down onto the roll and it tears the roll. If you had spoken to us, you could have learned the easy way instead of learning the hard way. And this engineer almost lost her job because she didn't take the trouble to find out why that very rudimentary mechanism was actually a learning in order to save money for the company. So we have to learn from the people that we find in those particular organizations. That being said, for us in the public sector, there are many conceptual challenges, but generally our public service bureaucrats like to explain to you very complicated ways as to how they resolve something. And yet, there are steps that they don't know what happened and how it happened. And yet, if they went down to people lower down, they basically can know the know-how in terms of how they got to those particular results. But in many instances, they don't know what has happened. And therefore, there's a hell of a lot of fuzziness, as fuzzy as that particular cartoon is. But also for us, in terms of the public sector, the theory of action is based on a number of issues that previous presenters have raised. Democracy, the human rights, the role clarification, the rule of law, the freedom of expression, development, equality, both gender included as well, access to information, good governance, and sound leadership. For us, those are the core values that need to be embedded in the organization. But also the multi-stakeholder, these are the variables, the conflicting objectives, the values and the ethics, the resource limitation, our complex accountabilities, our organizational inertia, and weak performance are things that impact on whether we're going to get particular results that are going to make our citizens happy at the end of the day. But all of that being said, there's learning, and the learning impacts on whether we've clarified the objectives, whether we've investigated the opportunities and threats, whether we formulated the strategies, deployed the resources, consolidated the support in order for it to happen, galvanized the commitments, assess the results, and refine the strategies. So that for us is a theory in action in terms of the learning. And therefore you see the dependencies in terms of the human factor. So knowing that, the important thing in terms of the building blocks for us is that the organizations are not just the collection of the individuals, but the organization actually learns from the individual learnings, because we say in the public sector, it starts with the individual themselves, who make up the various work groups because they've got the individual competencies, then make up the systems and the processes in those particular localities, and the collection of organizations that eventually influence us both regionally and international. And I was sharing with a number of my colleagues how it is starting to work in that way for us. Now, if we can harness, and the increasing scope of our influence at the end of the day is about the individuals. But the factors that are influencing the theory of action, which at the end of the day impacts on the theory of use for the whole organization. And I think Lisa spoke to a number of those issues. For the individuals, the espoused theory of action, unfortunately, is not necessarily the actual theory of action, because there's a lot of dishonesty in the sense that each person's got their own thinking, they've got their own values, they've got their own needs, their ethics, and their behavior. That in the mixing bowl then translates to whatever that supposed espoused theory is, which is not necessarily the behavioral theory in use in that particular organization. And for us, like large organizations, like the public service, we see that on a daily basis. Now, in terms of the organizational learning, the very important thing is the collective, the continuous process of reinforcement and the extinction that occurs within that work tribe. But how do you get to that point of making everybody strongly agree that it's no more necessary to do something in that particular way, or it's no more necessary to do that thing anymore? A little anecdotal thing from someone in the Western Cape. He was explaining to me, he got into the workplace and there was a submission, and in the submission was a stiffy disk, and he asked around. He was brand new, 30 people in open plan office, and it was explained to him, no, this floppy disk is for if anybody wanted to change the submission uproot, but also for storing, archiving. They needed to keep it in terms of the Archive Act. What then happened is that he went downstairs, he found all these boxes, and he found these things stored in brand new stiffy disks. And then he went around to the office, and he went from computer to computer, and he went to his supervisor and he said, every one of the 30 computers does not have a place for a stiffy disk anymore. So I'm not too clear why we are still doing what we are doing. And clearly it's because the policy said so, and this is the way it's been done around here. Now, clearly he introduced learning, and he said, can't we just send it via email? And just by that intervention, things were changed. But bureaucracies are very, very difficult to change in that that's the way it's done, and there was a reason, and everybody forgot what the reason was, but it's supposed to be like that because it's supposed to be like that. But the socialization factor is such an important one. If a new person comes into the environment, the problem is the old employees know and the new employee has to learn. In that instance, the old employees actually learned from the new employee through a reverse socialization, because in the bureaucracy, there's always this one-way socialization of learning. And in the end, you've got the influence on the organizational behavior because somebody had a positive solution in terms of what needed to have been done. But the important thing is also the individual maps and images. Each one of us has got our own individual map and image. And that, at the end of the day, determines how we are going to determine in our own implicit way how things are going to be done around here. So even if it's the rules and the way your boss wants things done, unfortunately, the power is how you interpret in your own maps and images. And the important thing is, if there is a critical mass of people with exactly the same cognition of the mapping and the images, that is going to be the mainstay as to how things are going to be done. It's not about the way the boss wants it done, and it's not about, in fact, in the bureaucracy, we have our own saying. They come and they go, and we watch. And unfortunately, that's the way it's done. But clearly, the collective of the individual representations creates that organizational construct. It's not the bosses that are creating the organizational construct at the end of the day. And therefore, the behavior is extremely important. But the individual learning journey, and this is what we're trying to deconstruct at the moment in the public service, in that you cannot do it alone. Because in your own career stages, there are aspects in terms of when you get in the exploration and the experimentation phase, and where people see you and your own competencies as you go right up to your commitment phase at the end of the day. If you are jumping phases and the time spent is not dependent, it's dependent on whether you validated your competencies within that particular stage, and then you can move on. But also the organizational maturity model, we are dealing quite a bit with that in terms of the measure of the design together with the behavior, in that we're seeing where we're classifying organizations at maturity level 1, we're finding that there's paranoia, there's politically driven patronage in the way in which people are recruited. There's also sabotaging of successes. This is absolutely at a low level of functionality from an organizational behavior perspective. But as there's progression, at the end of the day, you find it's much more open and a much more collective approach in the way in which people are engaging in terms of the degrees of motivation, and also a very, very strong matrix environment in how those particular organizations are excelling and functioning. But also the learning journey for us is initially, if you're at a level 1, it's just about daily firefighting and dealing with conflict management rather than dealing with the work itself. But at a level 2, you get into systems being developed because things start becoming repeatable, and there's a bit of tolerance that has been built in terms of the relationships as you're going up to the optimized, organization where it's strongly matrixed. This is one of the things that we have looked at the behavioral aspect of the organization itself and the behavioral aspect of people from the Myers-Briggs sort of arrangement. And we've come up with 3 different dimensions: the dimension of the leadership, the dimension of the management and the staff, and also their responses. So where staff show that they're ready for the behavioral changes in the organization, generally, it's when they are tired of the leadership style that is a command and control sort of arrangement. But also where the management, every day, it's just about ensuring compliance. And then for the employees, they must comply. They get tired. Employees are not there as, when Bill was speaking about the participative and agile organizations, that is not what should be in those type of organizations. But where the evolution starts happening in terms of the willingness of staff is when the leadership starts to inspire and motivate, but from a management perspective, you get an open and a more wider communication channel in both directions, and then you find that it's the staff themselves that start championing the change, whatever that change may be. As you evolve into a higher order organization, you're finding that everybody is abled. So you find the leadership is highly empowered and they empower both ways. You're finding that there's many opportunities that have been created for staff from a management perspective in terms of what they can do and should be doing. And also from the side of the staff, we must learn and we need to learn and we need to grow, and you get in a much more better and more positive environment. The last one in terms of the sustainability of that is where leadership is spending much of its time innovating more than anything else. What management is doing from a management perspective is trying to embed the change. And for the staff in those particular organizations, it's basically just co-creating the change in terms of the guidance that has been given from a management perspective. Just to indicate how to get there for us is from the as is to the to be. And what were the diminishing roles in terms of relinquishing functions from a behavioral perspective, moving towards things that will remain constant roles that you cannot discard because they're core and distinctive roles and competencies that must exist and will still remain. But in terms of the innovative part of the leadership, from the change compliance, from a compliance right up to an innovative change trajectory, there would be emerging roles. And the emerging roles are what should be the acquired new functions, acquired new behaviors as you're moving along your functional radar for the organization in terms of what needs to be done. In conclusion, I just took something from Soren Kierkegaard because he likes speaking about the ducks and the birds. And the whole issue is about the self-centeredness of ourselves when you're looking at the analogies from the animals, because what he says, if you are watching ducks in a pond and you observe them, it just takes one new duck entering the pond who doesn't understand the functioning of the ecosystem to contaminate the pond and upset the balance of the organisms, thus affecting the life of the pond as a habitable environment. And I thought that is very important for any new individual that comes into a particular space, because the learning is you learning from what you found there and you're building on that and you're moving along, because it's not your maps and images that's the alpha and the omega. it's basically the whole collective that make up the learning of the organization as an organism. Thank you.